Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Monday, June 17th, the start of a brand new week. We have all sorts of things to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. And Manny is in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A lot of stuff going on. The stock markets are soaring around the world to reassure everybody the economy is just fine, and you have no grounds to complain about what's going on with all those bankers out there and all the fraud that's coming out and all the rigging. Every day it seems like something else is being rigged. We could actually kind of save ourselves a lot of time and grief by finding out, is there anything about the financial industry that isn't being rigged? That's probably a much, much smaller number of items to keep track of here, but obviously, the big story continues to be the U.S. government's mass spying on every single American out here in the country. Foreign citizens around the world, they're spying on everybody. They're saving it up. And you remember when this story first broke and they said, oh, you don't have to worry. We're only saving the metadata from your phone calls. Really, you shouldn't be concerned about that. It's just who called who and where they're located. And really, that's, you shouldn't be upset about that. Well, in last Friday's Senate hearing, which most of the U.S. senators didn't bother to show up to, okay, Representative Gerald Nadler disclosed, actually this was on Thursday and confirmed on Friday. He was told that the NSA can access the contents of a phone call simply because an analyst decided he wanted to hear it. So this means the NSA is saving the content of all the phone calls. We knew they were doing it because of the scale of that data facility in Utah. Remember, we ran the numbers on that and said if they were saving just the metadata from every phone call made since the facility went online, or going back, I think 7 years was the threshold we had, they would only need a billionth of the data storage that facility has. It holds a septillion bytes of data. And that much storage is justified only if they are saving and recording every single phone call in America. In fact, we ran the numbers for every single phone call in the world and found out they had enough room to do that. And so now we're getting this confirmation. Last Thursday, it was repeated again in the Senate hearings on Friday, that yes, the NSA can go and listen to your phone calls. We already knew that from the Boston bombing, when that individual from the FBI admitted they could go back and listen to the phone calls of the Tsarnaev brothers. So we're already past this whole bovine excrement about we're just saving the metadata. They're saving it all. Now, of course, publicly, they're already trying to backtrack. The DNI is out there saying, oh, no, we won't listen to your calls without a warrant. Really, you can trust us to have your information. No, we can't. We can't trust these bozos with anything. They lie about everything. They lied about the existence of the system. Then they lied about what they're saving. And now they want us to take them at their word that really they're going to play by the rules and require a warrant before they listen to our phone calls. That's nonsense. It's already come out. They can just listen based on wishful thinking. That if an analyst thinks he's got a good enough reason to listen to your call, he'll just go and do it. It's a fishing expedition. It is exactly the behavior by government the Fourth Amendment was intended to prevent. And from all these revelations and stuff, obviously at this point, we can't trust a single thing this government says about anything, whether it's NSA spying or human-caused global warming or the true state of the economy. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, the NSA is trying to say that all of this spying on every single American and people around the world was necessary to thwart terror attacks. And last week they were saying, yes, we have stopped terror attacks, but we can't tell you what they are. And everybody says, well, okay, doesn't sound like you've really done much. So now the NSA is trying to come up with a list of terror attacks they have foiled with spying on Americans. But they're saying we have to be really careful about revealing these terror attacks because it might expose methods of national surveillance, blah, 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 blah. We have to be careful we don't reveal it. Well, that never stopped the FBI. Every time they have one of their terror arrests, they grab headlines and it's all over there. And, of course, then it comes out the FBI's own informants set these things up. It's entrapment. But the fact that it was entrapment and they always get thrown out of court somewhere down the road, that doesn't stop them from going out there and saying, see, we've got another terror arrest. Now, the NSA is claiming they stopped this potential subway bombing by a guy named Zassi. But the British authorities are saying, no, they caught him all on their own with regular police work. And again, we know the NSA is going to be lying about everything. So I don't care what list they concoct of how they saved us from the Death Star and from the Satan bug and whatever else. It's going to be nonsense. It's going to be complete and utter nonsense. Now, Eric Holder is out there saying that the NSA leaks are extremely damaging to the United States. And they are, but not in the way he's saying. He's trying to say, oh, it's threatening our security and our safety and the rest. No, it isn't. Remember, the only terrorists we've got running around this country are all these fakes like Adam Gadon, whose real name is Adam Perlman, and Yusuf al-Khattab, whose real name is Joseph Cohen. They're all actors. There's the only real terrorist threat. And if you want to end the terrorist threat, there's an easy way to do that. Stop bombing other people's countries. But the NSA leaks are extremely damaging to the United States government because now the American people and the people of the world understand the current government is illegal. It's illegitimate. It is unconstitutional. It is openly contemptuous of the Bill of Rights. And because the authority of the federal government rests on that Constitution, the instant they moved outside its bounds, they ceased to be the legal government of this country. It's a regime, is what we have in the United States of America, what we have in Washington, D.C. It is a regime. And we're seeing, the smear groups are still uncorking on Edward Snowden. Oh, he tears the tags off his couch cushions. He's got overdue library books. He passes wind in elevators. He's an evil person. You shouldn't be listening to him. But you should be listening to him. And you should be listening to all the other people who over the years blew the whistle on Echelon and all of these other systems where the government wanted to watch everything you're doing, hear everything you're saying, read everything that you text or write or post in their incredible paranoia and fear of the American people. That's the realization most Americans are coming to right now. Public enemy number one of the United States is the public. And Americans don't like being treated like they're terror suspects or criminal suspects if they've done nothing wrong. And again, it goes back to that Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. The government is not allowed to just poke into your private lives without a really good reason, a suspicion of an actual crime that has been committed, backed up by witnesses, testifying under oath, I saw Joe over there giving wet, sloppy kisses to Osama bin Laden. Now, there's a story that came out over at techdirt.com. The reason they're dragging their feet about this supposed secret law of the FISA court, or FISA court, however you pronounce it, that made this all legal and constitutional. The reason they're dragging their feet, first of all, you can't pass a law that bypasses the Constitution. Them's the rules. Get used to it. But apparently, the other story that's coming out over Tech Dirt is that the NSA and President Bush basically pressured the FISA court to reinterpret the law that existed in order to widen the net and just start collecting tons and tons of data. And it is unconstitutional. And we have to hold the government to the limits of the law. And the law that controls the government is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The government does not have the right to violate that Constitution. The 10th Amendment makes that clear. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of focus on Edward Snowden right now, which, whether he's legit or a poison-the-well stunt, we still don't know. Time will solve that mystery. But we need to remember, he's not the only one. We've had people like Thomas Drake, William Binney, and J. Kirk Weib, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. These are other NSA people who left the NSA and blew the whistle saying the NSA is watching everything that you do. Because the U.S. government has gone totally paranoid. They can't lie to you with impunity any longer. They're worried you are figuring out the truth and the reality of what this nation has become. They're alarmed at everybody who are coming to the realization the 16th Amendment wasn't actually ratified. The government lied to you about that. The government lied to you about Spanish mines in Havana Harbor. The government lied to you about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. The American people are waking up to the realization we are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. So why did Edward Snowden get so much media attention when these other people did not? Well, there's a couple of possible explanations. First of all, the U.S. government shot itself in the foot with regard to the corporate media with the exposure of the Department of Justice and the FBI going after all the phone records of all the reporters at Associated Press, and we can presume probably the other corporate media outlets as well, and phones inside the United States Congress. That's not investigation, that's not crime prevention, that's a fishing expedition. And a lot of the corporate media people are furious about that. So they're not going to be kindly disposed to trivializing or dismissing or downplaying further revelations. Another reason why Edward Snowden is getting a lot more, or maybe getting a lot more attention, is because those earlier exposures like Echelon, people were told, well, they weren't listening to anybody unless they had a really good reason, and the government, or rather the people back then were still naive and trusting and said, well, if the government's only watching the bad guys, I really don't care. Edward Snowden's revelation is everybody is being watched. You listening to this show right now. The government has been spying on you, saving everything you put online, saving everything you speak into a telephone, saving your text messages, your posts. They're saving your download history. They're saving everything that you order online. They're trying to build these gigantic dossiers with which they can figure out what you're thinking. It's pre-crime. Right out of the movie Minority Report. Oh, this person is buying fertilizer and they're buying Grolux bulbs and they've got to be doing drugs. That actually happened. Based on purchases from a garden supply place for indoor growing, the police raided this home, kicked down the door, went in, terrified everybody. Oh, they got to be growing marijuana. They weren't. Just indoor vegetable gardening to have a food supply. And they got their door kicked down. How dare you grow tomatoes here? And it shows that all of this data cannot actually yield real, meaningful intelligence. They're drowning in the wealth of all this data. And as far as all this social media searching is going on, I've had people writing into me when I talk about how there's simply too much data to evaluate, and they're saying, oh, there's all these new search techniques and there's all this new database stuff. It doesn't really matter. Garbage in, garbage out. They are data mining from social media where people tend to exaggerate. They make themselves out to be a lot more and a lot bigger than who they really are. It doesn't matter what kind of searching algorithms they come up with to manage this septillion bytes of data. The raw feedstock is unreliable because it's people's inflated opinions about themselves. Finally, it has been suggested that the revelations regarding Edward Snowden were intentionally put out into the public as part of a campaign to frighten us all into staying silent, to stop communicating with each other. And boy, has that blown up in their faces. Just like back when the Department of Justice spying on reporters came out. And I speculated that might have been intended to discourage reporters from talking to sources on Capitol Hill. That didn't work. Right now, the administration is showing a track record of very, very poor decision-making and very poor analysis of what the results are going to be. And so now we have this article over here, Blacklisted News, talking about what I was just mentioning. We're looking at the beginning of pre-crime. They're trying to come up with these computer programs that can sift through all this data they're saving on you and pick out who is going to do what. Okay.
Wouldn't it be better if all your apps, sites, and networks were in the same place, so you didn't have to dig? We thought so too. Introducing the new HTC One with LinkFeed. All your favorite content streamed live onto your home screen. The new all-metal HTC One. It's everything your phone isn't.
Just a second, sir. Hold on.
Yeah, you came in 2 minutes early.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. You came in 2 minutes early. Hello?
There you go.
Okay, Skype just... Okay, Skype just
Yeah,
crashed.
Michael, you were on air.
Okay, well, all right, fine. We'll just...
Okay.
Okay, well, all right. Probably the NSA is trying to hack into our feed here. And, all right, so we're live on the air here, and we're coming up on a commercial break, and we're going to reconnect Skype during the commercial break. Could be the NSA people screwing around with us here. So we've got about half a minute before we go on there. Anyway, so we're talking about this article over at Blacklisted News, where the next phase of this whole spy operation is going to be artificial intelligence programs to... Okay, we're back here in on the air, and what happened, for those of you who were wondering, is that we had a situation where our Skype setup absolutely crashed. It lost communication, crashed, would not come back up, and I wound up having to completely reboot the system. I've never seen that happen in all the years of using Skype. Do we have cause to be concerned about it? Yeah, we do. We know that Skype is one of the systems that is backdoored by the NSA. I can't imagine why they'd be so foolish as to try and pull me off the air with such a stunt, but we are back here. So, picking up where we left off about 5 minutes ago, we have this article that's over in Blacklisted News. The next NSA spying shoe to drop is they're starting to create these artificially intelligent programs that will sift through this septillion bytes of data, looking for patterns that will be able to predict when anybody is going to do something the government does not like. But of course, again, the raw feedstock for much of this data is social media, private communications. It's an accumulation of 330 million Americans' little white lies, little ego feeds, and they're not going to get anything meaningful out of it. We were talking about that example where they were using purchase patterns at a gardening store to try and find drug growers, and they kicked down the door of somebody who was just doing some indoor vegetable gardening. You don't know there's a crime until you've witnessed a crime. You cannot predict crime. In fact, if you go back and you look at the history of criminology, you will see that every 20 to 30 years, some scientist stand up and says, I have a way to predict who will be a criminal and who won't be. Whether it's psychological testing or phrenology. Remember phrenology, that you could tell a person from the bumps on the head? They actually tried to use that to predict crime. And this isn't going to work any better. And I'll give you a really good example. In the course of writing articles or preparing graphics for this website and this radio show, I go out and I search and I access all kinds of information I normally otherwise would not. Anybody trying to build a dossier about my personality based on my web searches, they're going to come up with garbage as a result. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for all the emails that were worried about our drop in communication here. But out here on the island of Oahu, it's kind of a one-man show, and I do my own engineering as well as talking and the rest of it. So we dealt with it. We're back here live and online and ready to rock here. Now, apparently over the weekend, there was a protest in Washington, D.C. against the U.S. government spying, and apparently the Capitol Police went in and broke it up. Not unlike what the Turkish police were doing to their protesters only about 2 weeks ago, and look how that deteriorated. Didn't see a lot of that on the corporate media, but the corporate media is reporting that because of this spying on Americans scandal, quite unconstitutional, the approval rating of the government as a whole, and particularly of President Obama, is plummeting, the biggest single drop of his entire presidential career. Americans are angry about this. Even the corporate media is having to come out and say 2/3 of Americans think this is a lousy idea. I have yet to actually meet, in real life, a human being who thinks this is a good idea for the government to be watching every single thing that we do on the 1 in a million chance, 1 in 100 million chance we might actually be a terrorist. Because that's the odds that they have there. I mean, the number of real terrorists out there, nobody really knows. But there's only a few. I mean, there's all the patsies the FBI sucker into their entrapments. But we're talking a very few people against a total U.S. population of 330 million. And they think they're going to scan 330 million Americans and be able to accurately determine from their online identities who is really a terrorist and who isn't. Now, along with the revelations about NSA spying, there's a parallel scandal that is continuing to emerge. And we did talk about this a long time ago. And that is the fact that the United States government is spending your tax dollars to purchase special software allowing them to forge online identities, where they'll have one propagandist sitting at a desk who is managing 50 or 60 phony IDs on Facebook, MySpace, Google, various blogs of corporate media outlets where they're simply typing in the propaganda and it appears on all these different outlets under different names. They're using your money to lie to you. And anything that they can use, insults, smearing, spamming, troll-like behavior, you may not even be dealing with a human being. You're dealing with a computer that you were forced to pay for at a time when our government can't find the money to take care of our roads and bridges and schools and hospitals, but by golly, they're going to spend all that it takes to keep an eye on you and to keep you bamboozled by trying to pretend that, oh, there's millions of Americans who believe in what the government is doing and millions of Americans who support Obama, and they're all phonies. Look at how many politicians have been caught faking their Twitter follower numbers or their Facebook follower numbers. Hillary Clinton just launched her Twitter channel last week, and already she's up to 100,000 followers. Do you really think there are that many Americans interested in following her and hearing about her hairstyles? It's the beginning of her 2016 presidential campaign, and yeah, they're going to, look how many followers I have. And they've been caught doing that over and over again. They're faking their support to convince you to support them. Same thing with Israel and Megaphone. For those of you who don't know what that is, Megaphone is probably the only social media not under NSA surveillance in this country right now. And it was put out by Israel, where Israel's foreign ministry would recruit Israeli or even just Jewish students in the United States of America. They will pay them to sit at home. These guys don't have to go work at the fast food restaurants or anything. They're paid to sit at home, prowl the internet looking for anything that's critical of Israel, and they type into this little megaphone window, oh, this person over at this website is saying something bad about Israel. Everybody else running Megaphone gets the message, and they all know to go in there and leap on and scream, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite, you're this, and you're that. They're trying to take control of the internet in much the same way they took control of radio and television, and it's not working because we know that's exactly what they're doing. Now, China, of course, has inadvertently been drawn into the Edward Snowden situation. McCain is out there and Dick Cheney is out there saying that the fact that he's in China proves he's a Chinese spy, and the only reason he did this was to harm the United States on behalf of China. China, of course, is saying this is ridiculous. He's just staying in a hotel in our country. But they are already indicating that if the U.S. seeks to extradite Snowden back to the U.S., China's not kindly disposed to that. So as I mentioned earlier in the show, from all of this spying, from all of this surveillance, TV cameras, microphones, all of it, it is clear that from the point of view of the United States government, public enemy number one is the public. And there's an article on this very topic over at rinf.com. We've got it linked to whatreallyhappened.com. Another article, this is over at blogtips.com. The NSA is copying all Internet data to create dossiers on every single user of the Internet anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the world. This was reported over at the Associated Press. And remember, those reporters at the Associated Press, they're not very sympathetic to the government now that they know they were being spied on. But AP is out there saying PRISM is just a tiny, tiny part of a far larger, more intrusive digital spying system. According to this latest AP report, the NSA copies everything traveling on the Internet, in and outside the United States. They call it hoovering. They're just sucking it all up through these fiber lines. And as I mentioned before we had our little crash out on Skype, in the course of writing articles and preparing graphics for this website and the radio show, I go out to a lot of websites and I search for a lot of things that I normally would not do just on my own personal interests. So if the NSA is building a dossier on me based on what I go out and search for, it's not going to be reflective of who I am or what my personality is or what my real feelings are. Garbage in, garbage out. And that is really the downfall of this whole total information awareness. If they are relying on social media for any kind of a substantial portion of this intelligence, what they're getting is not hard fact about the American people. They're getting the American people's own perceptions of themselves. Everybody exaggerates on social media. They use photos that are a few years young. They exaggerate the size of the fish they caught. They exaggerate the size of the boat they used to catch the fish. That's just human nature. People exaggerate on social media because they don't figure it's that big a deal. It's social media. It's like having a few beers down at the bar and talking about how great you were in college football. And the story gets more grandiose with the passage of years. And yet we have the National Security Agency apparently convinced they can depend on your own perceptions of yourself in social media on which to reliably base pre-crime. Now, Dick Cheney is out there screaming Edward Snowden is a traitor and Rand Paul is wrong about the surveillance. Now, as I mentioned last week, the definition of being a traitor is providing aid and comfort to the enemy in time of war. Edward Snowden blew the whistle on the NSA spying on the American people to the American people. So for Dick Cheney to use the word traitor in this context means the United States sees the American people as the enemy and sees itself as already in a state of war. Public enemy number one is the public. But so Dick Cheney was out there saying, he's out there saying, oh, Snowden's part of a larger plot. It's part of China. It's part of Russia. They're looking for somebody to blame and take the focus off the fact our government violated the Constitution. And he's out there saying, this is ridiculous about constitutional rights. We've got to have complete surveillance on everybody. Okay, Dick, if you feel surveillance of your private moments isn't a problem, then let's have all the audio and videotapes from the Presidential Emergency Operating Center in the basement of the White House on 9/11. Because remember, Norman Mineta testified. Dick Cheney was down there as the plane was coming in toward the Pentagon. Let me read you Mr. Mineta's quote word for word. Quote, when he was asked about being in the... let's see. No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time the airplane coming into the Pentagon. There was a young man who'd come in and said to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out, and when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Now, no effort was made to intercept that plane coming into the Pentagon. And so clearly the only orders that were in effect at that time was, do not intercept that plane. But we don't know for sure. But if Dick Cheney is right, then we should be allowed to see all the audio and video that was taken during that moment in order to find out what really happened. But of course we understand the government's idea is they have a right to complete secrecy and privacy and you do not. Because after all, we're not a republic anymore. We're not even a democracy. We are a fascist dictatorship where government and bankers have a right to secrecy and you do not. But we are, when we talk about 9/11, the biggest single terror attack of all time, and we know all this spying began before 9/11. And so if Dick Cheney thinks that there's nothing wrong with your personal conversations being made public, let's make all of the information about what he meant down there in that emergency operations center public and find out what was actually meant by do the orders still stand. We're going to grab a phone call here. Aaron in Texas, aloha. Aaron, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I remember you a few shows back. Actually, you said it a few times in a few of your shows about how that word anti-Semite getting out of proportion, it's not really doesn't mean anything no more.
Yeah, they burned it out. They've worn out the shock value. Nobody cares anymore.
Yeah, well, I've noticed that there's another word that's kind of getting out of hand too. Terrorist.
You're right.
I don't know if you noticed, like, or even Erdogan now is out there. Terrorism. These people, these protesters, these peaceful protesters are terrorists. And another thing he had said a few times again were about how you're gonna see all these shows on Nazis, and you're gonna start seeing all these bad shows on just reminding you about the Holocaust. And well, I was speaking of Dick Cheney. I was watching Locked Up Aboard, hosted by Dick Cheney, and they were talking about on how the Iranians had the hostages, and they were talking about how they were terrorists and how bad they were, and they had the people that were hostages, coming on the show and talking about it. And when I went back and I did my own research on it, I found out that these were just a bunch of college kids. They were from universities that went into the U.S. embassy and had them hostages, but they weren't hurting them or they weren't beating them up or nothing like that. And in this Lockup Aboard, they had a different story. They made it seem like if these guys were beating up the Marines and making it seem pretty bad. I don't know exactly. You're right about most of the things you were saying.
Well, the problem I have with Locked Up Abroad, I've never actually watched an episode of it because it's such an obvious piece of pathetic propaganda about, look, things are worse in other countries. They may be bad in the U.S., but it's much worse everywhere else, and you shouldn't go over there and see what's going on for yourself. And, of course, that's the absolute best thing that anybody can do is get out of this country, travel to these other countries, and look for themselves what's really going on. And I went through that many, many years ago when my film work took me to other countries around the world, and I'd go in there and I'd see how beautiful they were, how clean it was, and, this idea that America was this clearly orders of magnitude superior culture and country were obviously fake. And it reminds me of that wonderful speech from the newsroom where the protagonist is up there saying America's not the greatest nation on earth anymore, and he's absolutely right. And so this Locked Up Abroad, and I'm not surprised Dick Cheney is hosting it, but it's very clearly the propaganda message is don't go to other countries, don't look for yourself. Things are bad in the United States, but they're really worse, in other countries. They're much worse dictatorships. They're much more brutal toward their people. And again, it's lies and fiction to try and keep you in your place.
I heard from Dr. David Duke, and he was talking. I was reading some of his books, and he's talking about how Christians and Muslims on a daily basis get beaten and spit on in Israel.
Christians too. Christians too. If you're a Christian in Israel, you will get spit on. Everywhere you go.
Imagine if somebody spit on a Jew here in the United States. Oh my God! I guarantee you that'd be headline news.
Oh, they'd arrest you for assault.
And in other countries too. I heard that in Austria there's a guy arrested for denying the Holocaust and because he wanted to do his own research on the Holocaust. With freedom of speech isn't allowed.
Not on that topic. Even in the United States of America, their attitude is freedom of speech does not expend to questioning the orthodox dogma of history, which is the foundation of so much political policy at this point. And, we just had the House of Representatives just added this amendment to the NDAA saying that the United States will always support Israel against existential threats. And that means more money, more of your kids for wars on anybody. Israel is saying, they want us to not exist. And
I think they should name the country again. Our country, they should rename it to the United States of Israel.
I think a lot of people already have. They certainly treat it that way. And it is. It's just spiraling completely out of control. And you look at how Israel is behaving, and the problem isn't that they're Jewish, the problem isn't their religion or their ethnicity, it's how they behave, and that is the reason for all the hostility today and stretching back 2,000 years. It isn't what God they worship, it isn't their ethnic group, it's how they treat everybody else around them, and we see that in Palestine, we see it in governments that are completely co-opted by Israel, here in the United States, up in Canada, over in Germany. It's the behavior that is the problem, not the religion.
All right, Mike. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let you go so you can finish up on most of your information. I really love your show. Keep it up. Bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Okay, moving right along here. This is an interesting story over at Engadget.com. This NSA spying is really a lot more omnipresent than you think. Apparently, during the 2009 G20 summit, the British spy agency set up phony internet cafes and hacked into the diplomats' Blackberries to find out what was going on. Remember what I told you about the Seattle Asia-Pacific Economic Conference? Same thing over there. And these foreign countries are not happy about this either. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Interesting little article over at RINF.com, and the headline reads, Dilemma for the Warfare Surveillance State. NSA and CIA cannot be sure that its personnel will obey the rules. Now, the overt idea of this article is that how could this Edward Snowden be allowed inside with a top-secret security clearance and then all of a sudden decide then that he wants to support constitutional restrictions on government? Well, people change over time. I had a security clearance myself many years ago, not top secret. I didn't get that high, and I wasn't interested in getting that high. But the thing is, people can get inside a system and realize the system is itself corrupt. And at that point, they have to make a moral choice. But there's a second subtext to this article I think we're going to start seeing in the coming weeks. Just like the Internal Revenue Service tried to blame the targeting of conservative groups on two rogue employees down in Cincinnati, I think we're going to see the NSA, as the true scale of these abuses becomes public, they're going to say, well, it's not policy that we're listening to your phone calls without warrants here. It's just a few rogue employees who were breaking the rules, and we will fire them, and that way we will save our spy operation that way. No, you won't. The entire spy operation against law-abiding Americans is itself unconstitutional. That is the violation of the Constitution. The other spin that we're getting is, well, we're saving all this data, but it's not a Fourth Amendment violation until somebody actually looks at the data without a warrant. No, that's kind of like a burglar coming into your home and stealing your valuables and saying, it isn't really a crime until I sell those valuables to a fence or trade them for drugs. Does not work. The instant they broke ground to build these data centers, and I emphasize the plural, that was the Fourth Amendment violation right there. We have that septillion byte facility that is operational in Utah. They're building a new one in Maryland. We've got one here on the island of Oahu. They're up in the middle of the island where the Echelon station is. There used to be this giant circular VHF radio antenna. It was actually kind of cool to look at. And they tore that down, and the NSA has their new data center there to keep an eye on those of us out here in the Pacific Ocean. So wave up here to wave to the people up there in the middle of the island here. All righty, let's see. Turkey is very upset over revelations that the British version of this global computer spy network, basically it's Echelon on steroids. They already had the infrastructure and the organizational structure back in the days of Echelon. All they've done is add to it to increase its scope. And Turkey is very alarmed over the fact that Britain has spied on foreign governments attending G20 meetings. And they say it constitutes a scandal. Now, I am sure from the point of view of ordinary Americans, we might shrug our shoulders and say foreign diplomats are being spied on. It's just sort of kind of the way things are always being done. We know the diplomats have a different idea. Spying is what you do to the people. You don't do it to the diplomats. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the NSA spying on everybody. Scandal. All your data belong to us. And the polls are turning against the government on this thing. Americans are outraged, and they have every right to be. That Constitution is the contract with America. And if the government doesn't want to obey that contract, they're free to leave. Resign, abdicate, whatever you want to call it. That is your only legal, moral, ethical option. Get the heck out. And they're trying to recover from this, and they're getting pretty desperate. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel for people to support them. And apparently, I got all these emails about this beauty contest that was happening over the weekend, Miss Northern and Southern Hemisphere, Miss something like that, I don't, whatever it is. And apparently, Miss Alabama got up there, and her question to display her intellectual prowess was about the NSA PRISM. Do you think it was a Fed question? And she's up there saying, oh, yeah, this is really a good thing. We have to save ourselves from the evil terrorists. And the audience is cheering, USA, USA, USA. Boy, when they're down there using the beauty bimbos as spokespeople to try and sell this to the American people, that is really, they've hit the panic button here. And it's shocking to me. I didn't even know they still had beauty pageants. Oh, my goodness here. Now, the White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, has come out basically saying that Obama doesn't believe the secret NSA surveillance violated privacy rights. The implication being that because the president doesn't believe it's violated privacy rights, that you shouldn't too. Well, you know something? There's nothing in the Constitution says that the government has the right to tell you what to think or what to believe. And my advice is don't rely on belief anyway, because that is being used against you. The belief in honest banking, the belief in benevolent government, the belief in truthful corporate media. It's always your beliefs are used as weapons against you. And it doesn't matter what Obama believes or not. It comes down to that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You have a right to privacy. The government is not allowed to go into any of your personal effects, which includes your phone calls and computer data, absent probable cause that you have actually committed a crime, supported by oath or affirmation. In other words, they need a witness or hard physical evidence. Can't have some bozo sitting up there in Utah saying, gee, I wonder what Joe Smith is thinking today. Blah, 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 blah. He's ordered a pizza. I guess he's okay for one more day. Now, there's a very alarming story that came out over at the Columbia Journalism Review. And it involves this interesting story where some reporters went out looking for information about some applications for this project, and they stumbled across a server which had PDFs of applications that were filled out, including identifying information like a Social Security number. And so they were looking at them and reporting on them, and the government has come down to charge them with violations of computer privacy laws. They're accused of hacking, and they didn't actually hack. The stuff was sitting on an open server. And I wanted to call attention to this because back when the Soviet Union was doing their thing, this was a very common trap to leave something of interest or value right out in the open, and the instant you touched it, you were charged with a crime. And I think this is part of the campaign by the U.S. government to scare corporate media away from doing their own real research and drive them back into simply transcribing official government handouts as the news. All these TV news networks ought to change their name and say, the government says. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Watching the stock market, it was really doing well. I mean, last night the Asian markets opened up high, Europe opened up high, American markets opened up high. In the last hour, though, definitely taking a plunge back down. And I'm not sure what has happened. We're going to have to figure out just what all of a sudden destroyed everybody's confidence and exuberance about what's going on out there. Now, meanwhile, there are other scandals out there, other gates. Remember, we're talking about Floodgate, the collective noun for all of these things. Benghazi Gate, DOJ Gate, IRS Gate, EPA Gate, NSA Gate, Prism Gate, Gate. Now, apparently, with regard to the Internal Revenue Service, the D.C. supervisor, Holly Paz, is now admitted that she was one of the people in D.C. scrutinizing conservative groups for delay, denial, harassment. And so this scandal is moving closer and closer to the White House. We know that White House staffers were aware this targeting was going on. They are asking us to believe that these staffers knew that this illegal, unconstitutional, tyrannical activity was going on and just somehow didn't get around to telling the president. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction to sell you. Now, there's an interesting article over at WhiteHouseDossier.com called Benghazi Must Not Be Lost Amid the Clutter, and they are absolutely right. And I was talking about this last week, that there's this whole plethora of scandals out there that are shocking people, but the one that continues to be sort of shoved off to one side, the one they don't want to talk about, is Benghazi. And as I mentioned before, when you're trying to find the truth of the matter, you look for the most protected point. You look for the place where all the cover-ups overlap. And that is where you need to be digging. And so now Benghazi is coming back up again. The story now is that Obama was allowed to sleep while this was all coming down because he had a fundraising come up. But new information has surfaced. These special forces that were ordered to stand down from Benghazi were only hours from there. They could have gotten there in plenty of time. And there's another interesting story that's come out here, and this one comes from a gentleman by the name of Phil Handley. He's a colonel in the United States Air Force, call sign Hands. And he set out this article, Betrayal in Benghazi, where he talks about the claim that the special forces were told to stand down because of fuel constraints on their aircraft. They didn't have enough fuel to get up there, and he basically goes through step by step why this is complete nonsense. So this idea they were told to stand down because they really couldn't reach there because of fuel constraints on their aircraft, they were actually much closer than originally claimed, and it's nonsense. They only needed enough fuel for the one-way trip, then they could have diverted over to the Benghazi airport and refueled there. And again, what I think happened in Benghazi, and the reason it is the most concealed of all the scandals, they're willing to talk about IRS, they're willing to talk about NSA spying, they're willing to talk about all of that, but Benghazi is still off limits. It's the great secret, the one that would bring it all crashing down. Now, last summer, polls showed Obama and Romney running neck and neck. A lot of polls had Romney slightly ahead. Many of the corporate media outlets were openly predicting a Mitt Romney victory last November. Obama had not gotten any traction off that guy they killed and claimed was bin Laden, mostly because of the way they just obviously got rid of all the evidence, dumped the body in the ocean, and all those phony photos leaked onto the internet. So Obama needed a publicity stunt. And what I think happened is a small team of operatives playing at being Al-Qaeda were supposed to enter the consulate and take the ambassador and his staff hostage. Oh, it's a new hostage crisis. Will it drag on for months the way it did in Iran? Is Obama the new Jimmy Carter? And Obama would let the drama build for a few days, capture the attention of the American people in the world, let the media hype the story. Then he would resolve the situation, send in the SEAL teams to rescue the hostages or do some kind of a trade that gets the ambassador back. And then Obama would campaign on how he didn't let the situation turn into a repeat of the Iranian hostage crisis, which would have dovetailed very nicely with the ongoing Iran bashing, and the movie Argo was out there pulling that same message. But the best laid plans of mice and men and candidates gang after Glay, and we know that the CIA operatives at the Annex could hear the gunfire from the consulate. We know that the gunfire was provoked in part by SEALs who were on location who refused the stand-down order. Now, looking at the consulate location through Google Earth, you can see heavily populated residential areas less than half a mile to the east and southwest, who no doubt also heard the gunfire from the consulate. Now, looking at how quickly sympathetic protests erupted across the Middle East during this incident, it is clear the region is an anti-American powder keg waiting a spark, which Obama inadvertently provided with this staged terror attack. So this group playing Al-Qaeda was a small group, but they were joined by real Libyans pouring in from all the adjoining neighborhoods saying, yes, they're kicking out the Americans. So what was a planned and rehearsed operation to kidnap the ambassador triggered a spontaneous riot with at least 200 participants on the ground. It spun out of control, leading to the deaths of the ambassador and others, And Obama's carefully prepared operation to make himself look like a hero turned into an epic fail, and they have been trying to cover it up ever since. That is what I think happened in Benghazi. And I'm not the only one. I've heard other people out there with the same exact idea, including this retired 4-star admiral who came out with the same thing 2 weeks ago. Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, conceded that highly trained special forces were stationed just a few hours away from Benghazi, but were told not to deploy. That tells us they wanted this to go forward. It was a planned operation. CIA at the Annex got a stand-down order. The Special Forces got a stand-down order. We know they had a Predator drone overhead, real-timing video of the assault back to the White House. The Predator drones have a top airspeed of 137 miles an hour. They're not built for speed. They're built for range and endurance, to stay over their targets for as long as possible. They are not fast movers. And that means that Predator had to be in the air on the way to Benghazi before the attack began. This was a staged PR stunt that went out of control. And now Obama's trying to dump it all on Hillary, and Hillary, who wants to run in 2016, is trying to figure out who she can dump it on. Now, over the weekend, there was another major explosion at the Damascus airport. And the reports are it was another Israeli bombing attack. The IDF is sitting there saying, who, us? We have no comment, one way or the other. But if you think we bombed Syria, you're just being an anti-Semite again. Usual stuff we get out there. Let's see. Now, the United States is out there claiming that they are not rushing to war with Syria. Oh, heavens forbid. And I guess after 2.5 years of a failed attempt at a covert military coup by hired mercenaries, yeah, I guess rush really isn't operative anymore. But we know they're trying to rush now because Assad has gotten his military forces organized and better trained. They're starting to recapture area after area. There's a huge assault on Aleppo to reclaim that city from the hired mercenaries. And these mercenaries are starting to fall back and crumble because they're not there for ideology. They're not there to protect their own homes. They're there for a paycheck. And if they get themselves killed, they don't get to cash the paycheck and have a lot of fun with it. And if the U.S. doesn't move quickly to intervene and provide more weapons to the rebels, there are going to be no rebels left for them to use these weapons. And then they'll just be floating around the Middle East to be used against Americans here. Pretty much everybody on the planet has reacted to this chemical weapons claim by the United States government last week as a load of nonsense, a load of USDA choice bovine excrement. It's another hoax to push us into another banker war, just like the claims about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction and the ongoing screaming and screeching about Iran's weapons of mass destruction. Meanwhile, the International Committee of the Red Cross has gone public saying they cannot confirm the use of any chemical weapons inside Syria. There's anecdotal stories floating around, most of them involving the rebels' use of chemical weapons, but the Red Cross says they have not been able to actually prove any of these at all. Meanwhile, there's a very interesting story. This came out of IsraelHayom.com. And the headline is that Israel, the U.S., and Jordan coordinating against Syrian weapons of mass destruction. And they are in turn quoting from Time magazine, where Israeli intelligence officials say Assad's potential departure would initiate plans to hit 18 weapon of mass destruction sites in Syria with airstrikes and ground troops. And here's the payoff quote. Israeli official, for the plan to work, it cannot involve Israel. So once again, we have Israel out there saying, go kill, go bomb, go attack, but we're going to stay home. You send the Americans to do it. That's what they're for. A lot of people are going back to this news story that came out only a couple of months back. Now it's being carried on Investment Watch blog, where the White House greenlit a plan to give chemical weapons to the hired mercenaries to use on Syrian civilians in order to blame Assad. Maybe that's where that sarin came from, that the Turkish authorities caught up there in a safe house for one of these radical Islamic groups that's part of the hired mercenaries. Somebody has to ask, where'd that come from? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, Russia has come out unequivocally saying they will not allow a no-fly zone to be created over Syria. They are going to veto any such resolution at the Security Council. Now, Putin is playing this like a chess player. At issue are those S-300 air defense missiles, which are quite capable. And Syria already contracted with Russia to buy some. Russia is talking about when they're going to send them. And, of course, the U.S. and Israel screaming, you can't give them weapons to shoot back at us when we're invading their country. That's not the way we set this up. And so far, there's a lot of confusion over whether the S-300s have been delivered or not. And a lot of concern about just when that might happen. But I think what Putin is doing is he's going to play by the book. Putin does not want Russia to look like they are ratcheting up the situation, that they're the cause of the escalation. So I think what Russia is going to do is they're going to let this resolution come up in the Security Council. They will veto it. And then at the point where the U.S. unilaterally on their own declares a no-fly zone, then the U.S. is seen as the aggressor and the villain, committing an act of war against Syria. And at that point, Russia can send in whatever weapon support they want to without looking like it's Russia trying to let the situation get out of control. So I think that's what's going on. Over in Great Britain, David Cameron is out there saying, yes, we've got to give bombs and bullets to those struggling, heroic Syrian people, meaning the hired mercenaries. And he's running up against a major brick wall in Parliament, especially in the House of Commons. And they're warning Cameron, if you bring this to a vote, you are going to get hammered on this. There's virtually no chance the House of Commons is going to go along with this. We all know it's another U.S. war for the bankers. We all know they're lying about chemical weapons in Syria the same as they were lying about nuclear weapons in Iraq and nuclear weapons in Iran. They apparently didn't have a plan B on what to do if the people of the world didn't believe the official stories of Plan A. Anyway, EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton is heading to Israel, where she is going to be put on the hot seat by Israel's government that the European Union should not be putting the political onus on Israel for the illegal settlements because that is somehow an obstruction to peace talks. So that's Israel's thinking. We're going to go on stealing land in the Palestinian territories, the Palestinian state. The UN now recognizes it as a state. Israel wants to go on stealing the land from these people. But if you talk about it, that is an impediment to peace. This is how screwed up Israel's thinking and worldview really is here. Now, we have this interesting story out of Veterans News Now. This is from Allison Weir. And there are suspicions rising that the president of the International War Crimes Tribunal may have interfered with prosecutions against Israel regarding various war crimes and abuses. This is over at The Hague. And Theodore Meron, an Israeli diplomat turned U.S. citizen and now president of the War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague, quote, has led a push for raising the bar for conviction in such cases to the point where conviction has become nearly impossible. Some analysts feel that Meron's motivation may be to protect Israeli political and military leaders from prosecutions that could place them in legal jeopardy. So, anyway, going to go to the phones here. We have Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to double back and talk about Benghazi.
By all means.
More. You hear me?
Yes, I said by all means.
Yeah, I wanted to speak about the ambassador, and he was a big-time online game player. He played a game called EVE Online, which was a massively multiplayer online RPG, except it's different from games like WoW or EverQuest, where you actually form things called corporations. And the ambassador had been making statements to his other members inside his corporation on this game, saying things like, if I make it through the night, there are people outside the door, and and it has led some people in that gaming community to speculate that what you were saying is that this was completely a setup, and that in fact it had been rehearsed a day or two beforehand.
Well, we know that the Obama administration has as one of its advisors a gentleman, I'm blanking on his name. He has got no military experience. He's got no national security experience, but he is a failed writer, and one of his books he tried to write and sell involved a hostage situation at a foreign embassy triggered by rage over this anti-Muslim film. And we know this anti-Muslim movie on which all of this was being blamed did not actually exist outside of that trailer. And we know the trailer was itself cut from another movie and overdubbed to fake that. So it's a fake from top to bottom. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Kyle. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're getting a report from Times of Israel, where we have to find out these things. The U.S. House of Representatives Armed Service Committee has voted to triple American funding to the Israeli Iron Dome missile development program. As you probably remember from this last altercation, pillar of smoke, pillar of fire, whatever they were calling it, it turned out Iron Dome wasn't really as good at shooting down missiles as it was claimed, much like the early version of the Patriot. Partly because the bottle rockets being fired by the Palestinians into Israel don't follow ballistic paths. Because of poor design, they corkscrew, they weave around, and that makes a ballistic intercept virtually impossible. So the solution there is, let's just give Israel more of your money. This is, of course, coming from the same United States Congress that just slashed food stamp funding again, slashes domestic spending. All the money's got to go to war. All the money's got to go to Wall Street. All the money's got to go to Israel. And you Americans, you should just pay your taxes and shut the heck up, because we're watching and listening to everything that you do. And the instant you do anything we don't like, we're going to get you. It's not working, but that's kind of the approach they're taking on this whole situation. Let's see. Apparently Syria has now come out and basically said that, yes, it was in fact Israel who bombed this facility west of Damascus. And apparently it's the same facility Israel bombed before, so Israel's just making the rubble bounce. They also bombed the airport one more time. And the Israeli government is saying no comment, no comment, no comment, no comment. And I'll tell you what the pattern here is. The last time Israel bombed Damascus, Syria said, if you attack us again, we will strike back. And so now Israel has attacked again, but they're not going to say anything about it. So that if there is a Syrian reprisal, Israel's going to say, oh, Syria's attacking us. We did nothing wrong. Syria's attacking us. You Americans, you have to go stand in front of the bullets for us. Seen that time and time and time again. Meanwhile, over in LibertyFight.com, there's apparently a bit of an upset going on over what is called the Texas-Israel Chamber of Commerce, where all of these local Texas officials are getting their usual free trip to Israel to meet with high-level Israeli government officials and be videotaped having sex with people not their spouses so that they can be depended on to come back to the United States and cut all these really wonderful deals for Israel. Now, we're responding to Iran's election, where Hassan Rouhani is the new president of Iran, and Ahmadinejad is out there saying, and as I leave you, I want you to know, you won't have Ahmadinejad to kick around anymore. And Rouhani is a moderate. He's out there basically questioning the usefulness and the legitimacy of the sanctions campaign, but he's not a militant, aggressive person. He's a moderate. He's trying to find the optimum way for everybody to get along. But of course, over in Israel, they can't allow a new moderate Iranian president to derail the rush for war. And Netanyahu is out there saying, the elections change nothing. It's just a new devil over there. And we've got to go in and make sure that we destroy their nuclear bombs. Iran doesn't have any nuclear bombs. And we're seeing all this caterwauling from the United States and Israel about we have got to derail their illicit nuclear program. There is nothing illicit about Iran's nuclear program. They have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, so has the United States. Everything Iran is doing with nuclear technology, power stations, medical isotopes, industrial applications, all of it is allowed to them under that treaty which the U.S. signed. If there's an illicit nuclear program in the Middle East, it's Israel, which has nuclear weapons. They tried to sell one to South Africa. Who knows who else they succeeded in selling nuclear weapons to. They will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will not allow IAEA inspections. And they have the chutzpah to stand up there and point at Iran and say, they're illicit, they're illegal, they're the bad guys. Iran has not invaded another country in a war of aggression for over 200 years. They are not the problem in the Middle East. U.S. and Israel can't seem to go for 6 months without attacking somebody. So already they're trying to portray Hassan Rouhani as the new Iranian devil. He's bad. Hate him. Hate him. We've got to go kill him. And Netanyahu was out there screaming, Iran's nuclear program must be stopped by any means. Okay, Benny, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Watch your head climbing into that transport, and we're going to call Iran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butt all by yourself. But given that Israel was part of that whopper we were all told about Iraq's nuclear weapons, you will forgive us if we sit this one out and keep our kids safe at home. Which, of course, is exactly the opposite of the policy we're hearing from Israel about Syria. Yes, we must all attack Syria, but we Israelis are going to stay home. White House is out there saying Iran can be a partner of U.S. if they halt the illicit nuclear program. And again, it's not illicit. The United States signed a treaty with Iran saying Iran is allowed to have nuclear power, medical isotopes, industrial applications. The IAEA, rumor and innuendo aside, has found zero evidence of a nuclear weapons program. Under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the United States is obligated to go into Iran and help them build power stations, medical isotope facilities, industrial applications, which is a really good way to make sure there isn't a clandestine bomb factory under any of that. If you're actually in there on the ground pouring the concrete foundations, laying the pipes, and running the wiring. But this is not about the United States worried about an Iranian nuclear weapon. This is about ginning up another excuse for another invasion, for another war for the bankers in which your children are going to be killed and crippled. That's the real goal. The United States is not afraid of an Iranian nuclear weapon. The United States has the world's most powerful nuclear arsenal. Tens of thousands of warheads and missiles, cruise missiles, stealth bombers, ballistic missile submarines, Minuteman missiles in all those silos. If Iran had one nuclear bomb, what are they going to do with it? They'll all put it in a museum. Look, we have a nuclear bomb. We'll put it in a parade down the streets of Tehran. They're not going to use it against the United States of America because the response would be instant nuclear annihilation. The United States would turn all of Iran into a giant green glass parking lot and send in the Marines to paint the lines. Iran is not going to attack the United States. And Iran is not going to attack Israel for the same reason. Israel is the world's 6th largest nuclear power. The reason Israel does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon is because that makes it harder for Israel to invade Iran and take it over. Makes it harder for the United States to invade Iran and take it over. Look at the recent history. The United States doesn't actually attack and invade countries that really do have nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapon is a deterrent. They go out and they say, this country has nuclear weapons. Then they invade. They don't actually invade countries that really do have them. Even if Iran had a nuclear weapon, they're not going to use it against the United States. They're not going to use it against Israel. What they can and will and should do is use it against an invading army. That's the reason to have these weapons. We were all sold on America's nuclear arsenal because it was a deterrent. It would keep nations from attacking us. And my parents' generation had to shell out $5 trillion, and that's back when $1 trillion was really a lot of money, before all this quantitative easing made it worthless, to build all those silos and ballistic missile submarines and bombers and fail-safe points and all the rest of that stuff, with the idea that if we spent all that money on that nuclear arsenal, we would be safe from invasion. And now that same government that took all that money and built all those weapons is out there saying that if Iran gets a single bomb, they will immediately attack us. You can't have it both ways. Either that deterrent works or it does not. And if it does not deter Iran from attacking us with their nuclear weapon, then shut it all down and give the American people a refund for all the construction costs and the maintenance. You can't have it both ways. Now, I want to warn you about a story that got a lot of coverage on the Internet over the weekend, and it's basically the claim, and it was even picked up by Russia Today, where it says Iran is deploying a 4,000-strong force to Syria to help Assad against the U.S. military buildup in Syria and coming over from Jordan. Now, with Syria and Iran having a mutual defense pact, this would be a reasonable thing for Iran to do. But, I caution, we can't find a source for this claim that Iran is sending troops to Syria. It's not in the Syrian media. It's not in the Iranian media. And the problem is that for Iran to do something this overt opens the door to a U.S.-Israeli invasion by saying, oh, you're interfering with our war on Syria, and that gives us the excuse to go in and start bombing Iran, which is what the U.S. and Israel want. The original report on this story did not have a source for this claim that Iran was sending 4,000 troops to Syria. And I can find no confirmation of it. I think it is more of this propaganda to use Syria as that final stepping stone to the long lusted for war against Iran, to make sure Iran's oil is only for sale for U.S. dollars, to force the blessings of private central banking onto those poor people who have done nothing wrong at all except to refuse private central banking. Now then, over in Turkey, situation is still deteriorating there, and I think that's why the U.S. is now looking at Jordan as the launching point for the ground invasion of Syria. 5 top Turkish trade unions are joining the demonstrators and protesters. They've gone on a one-day strike against the Turkish government. In response, the Turkish Interior Minister has said nationwide strikes are illegal, and we will suppress it. And so the situation is escalating. Apparently, the Turkish government is now arresting and prosecuting doctors who treated injured demonstrators. Now, these doctors were not part of the protest. They didn't take a side. They simply said, people are being hurt. We need to go down and take care of them. And now the Turkish government is targeting them for daring to treat the injuries inflicted on the protesters by the government. Just let them get a little gangrene, you know, that's... Turkey is now, apparently the Turkish Deputy Prime Minister is now saying it is time for Turkey to deploy its army against the protesters. That was also one of Mubarak's big mistakes. They're just making the situation worse. We have all been raised to believe in the idea of a democracy where the government is supposed to listen to the people, one way or the other. We do not accept, we do not countenance a nation model where the government says this is what you believe and this is how you'll act and you have no question but to do it. And so any time the people are standing up and saying the government is not taking care of this nation and we call for change democratically, and the government refuses, obviously our sympathies are going to be with the protesters and the people, whether it was what was going on in Egypt or what's going on now in Turkey. Now, getting on to the economy, over at Investment Watch blog, Eric Sprott is out there talking about the physical demand for gold and silver is draining supplies. The supply of physical metal is drying up. Over in Vietnam, they were talking about buying gold. Physical is now $17 over the spot price, which is based on the paper contracts. We've seen greater spreads than that around the world. Here in the U.S. at one point, it was something like $35 over the spot price based on the paper trade. But the physical supply is drying up, and that means all these private central banks that are trying to recover enough gold to cover the shortfall in those bullion deposit vaults, they're not able to find it. And that is why, again, I guarantee you, if Obama succeeds in taking away your guns, the very next thing he is coming for is your physical gold and silver. To give to the banks, to save the banks, just like Roosevelt did back in 1933, because under the government of the United States model, philosophy, banks are more important than the American people. The banks must be cared for and propped up and saved. The people, who cares about them? And they did it once before, and they're getting ready to do it again. And then after the gold and silver, they're going to come for your sons and daughters to throw into more wars for the bankers, to force the entire world under one gigantic private central bank, to enslave the human race to artificially created debt for the rest of time. People are still out there screaming, oh, this is capitalism. No, it isn't. We lost capitalism a long time ago. We're now under a fascist economic model, where the rich are encouraged to get richer and the poor are made poorer to prop it all up. When you make money, you get to keep it. When you lose money, we make the people pay for it. That is fascism. Now, over in Detroit, as you probably are aware, they went into default on a great bit of their debt. We're still waiting to see what happened with those credit default swaps that were sold against that debt, and that may have a lot to do with this sudden downturn on the market. And there's been a bit of a dead cat bounce, and they're trying to get it back up there again, but it really went down. Mac Slavo is out there saying collapse is now inevitable. There is no way. There's no other path into the future for Detroit but complete and utter financial collapse. And a lot of people are saying, take a good look at Detroit, because that is what is going to happen to the rest of the United States of America. All the jobs sent to other countries for tax advantages, all of this debt being piled up by private central banking's little Ponzi scheme until the nation rots out from under us. It's heartbreaking looking at some of those buildings in Detroit that used to be beautiful buildings, used to be showpieces, used to be icons. People in Detroit could point to those buildings and say, look at what our city is like. And now they point at those ruins and say, look at what our city is like. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, Detroit may be in ruins, may be crumbling apart, maybe millions of Americans on food stamps, but the government has money to go and look for Jimmy Hoffa's remains. And they're trying to make a big deal about that, and they're hoping they can find the bodies so they can say, see, we solved a crime today, for all that money. I think it's a complete waste of time. I'm willing to bet they're not going to find anything there, because it's just another way of trying to grab headlines and look like they're doing something useful for the American people to justify their continued paychecks here. And we're hearing all these weird stories about the misuse of SWAT teams. Now, SWAT was originally set up to deal with violent criminals, hostage situations, people who are out in the middle of the road with machine guns killing people. Well, it turns out there really isn't that much of that going on in this country. But these SWAT operations departments don't want to give up their toys. They certainly don't want to give up their paychecks. And they're being used for some very inappropriate things. We were talking about that family who got targeted for a raid because over at the gardening supply place they'd been buying gardening supplies and glow-lux bulbs for indoor gardening. And some bozo over at the computer monitoring center said, I'll bet you they're growing marijuana down there in their basement. And so they kicked down the doors, went in with the SWAT team, terrorized the family, held machine guns on the kids. They're just growing vegetables indoors during the winter as a food supply. Now we've got this story about how a SWAT team was sent by the Department of Education. Didn't even go through a court, didn't even have a warrant. The Department of Education called the SWAT team to go and raid this home because they were looking for a student who was delinquent on a student loan and may have misreported income on the student loan application. Something like that. And so the SWAT team goes out and they kick down the door and they just destroy the place, looking for evidence and ransacking. Turned out the person they were looking for didn't even live there. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Sam in Chicago. Aloha, Sam. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Want your opinion on something. Do you, and sorry to change the subject, do you think that, the constant bashing of China has, the constant, the Free Tibet thing that's going on, the constant bashing by the U.S. Media, if that has something to do with the gold-backed yuan.
Yeah, it's all about the gold-backed yuan. They might use the Tibet situation to sell a war with China to the American people. Oh, we must go in and save those poor Tibetans from the evil Chinese oppressors. But that's not the agenda. The agenda is getting that gold-backed yuan out of the way of the U.S. dollar. Absolutely. Got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call, Sam. We'll be back with another phone call. And Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call. Chuck in Washington. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Hello, Chuck. Are you there? Going once?
Yeah.
Well, fuck, that sucked.
Are you there?
He didn't realize he was on air.
Okay, Chuck, are you there? You're on the air. What's on your mind? One more try. Okay.
He dropped off.
All right, he dropped off. Okay. All right, moving right along here. Getting back to the economy here, if you are a former homeowner and you had your home taken during the foreclosure gate fraud, you may not be off the hook. And apparently the way foreclosures are set up now, you can still be assessed for part of the debt. If the value of your home is below your mortgage, if you were foreclosed when you're underwater, you are still considered to be owing that balance to the mortgage lender, and they will take a lot of years catching up to you in order to allow the interest payments to grow to an absolute insane point here. And apparently lenders are filing new motions on old foreclosure lawsuits to go after that leftover debt. Plus they pile on all court fees, attorney fees, and tens of thousands in interest have been accruing for years. This is the looting of the wealth of the American people for the bankers. Most foreclosed homeowners have no idea they can be targeted this way. And all of this goes back to that Ponzi scheme, that pyramid scam called private central banking that issues all the public currency as a loan at interest, that took the public currency away from being a public utility and turned it into another private money-making scam by the money junkies. Another article we have out here, Faces of the Minimum Wage, and it ties in with a project that Claire is working on now called Desperation's Army, where the labor numbers about new job creation and unemployment rates, which we all know are being cooked anyway, conceal a harsh reality. The high-paying jobs that used to define the middle class are pretty much all gone, sent to other countries for tax advantages. And all the new jobs being created are low-income jobs, minimum wage jobs, that has exacerbated the income inequality in this country. They took away your high-paying jobs and they said you should be happy with a low-paying job, especially to all those kids who went to college and they took out student loans to get themselves a college education that they were assured by the college recruiters would result in high-paying jobs with which they could pay back their student loans. And they got lied to. You all got lied to. We're living in a fascist economic dictatorship, and the end result of all fascist economic dictatorships is wealth for the few and crushing poverty and debt for everybody else. It is a design feature. It's not a bug. It's not an accident. It is designed that way. Fascism takes the wealth away from the people of the nation whose labor created that wealth and showers it all over the 1%. It's what they want. It's what they think is supposed to be. Whatever imaginary playmate in the sky they pray to says, oh, our God wants you to have all of the world's riches. It's the sign of the elect and the blessed for you to have all the riches. And anything that you can do to take more riches to yourself is obviously the will of the imaginary playmate in the sky. It kind of sucks for everybody else who just wants to live their lives and take care of their families. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still trying to reach Paul from Poker Face regarding Freedom Palooza, and we hope to have him here on the line very shortly. Talking about misuse of SWAT teams. Apparently, down at the Kennedy Space Center, NASA, which stands for Never a Straight Answer, has their own SWAT team. And they had this story about the spaceport protectors, and they had a picture of all those guys with their body armor and their M16s and their armored vehicles in front of the vehicle assembly building, which since the end of America's manned space program pretty much is sitting empty. So NASA is spending money to have these SWAT guys protect an empty building. It's absurd. It's all this money for all this security, and they don't even have anything really to protect any longer. It's a big, empty building. And by the way, it's not an easy one to operate in because it is so large. It actually has its own weather inside. If you're not careful, you can actually have rain falling out of the sky inside the vehicle assembly building. Just makes it kind of complicated to do anything in there. Now, last week, we were talking about the ricin letters episode, where apparently Obama and some others got these letters that tested positive for ricin, with all this, you can't have my gun until you come and take it from me. And, of course, the media seized on this as proof that all gun owners are nuts who engage in acts of terrorism and blah, 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 blah. Well, the story took an interesting turn because the letters have now been traced back to an actress named, her screen name is Shannon Guess. Her real name is Shannon Richardson. According to the Internet Movie Database, she says she's 35 years old, but if so, she's had a hard, rough life because it looks like there's a lot more mileage on there. And she plays zombies in movies and all that kind of stuff. And it turns out rather interestingly that she herself is a bitter opponent of gun rights. She's a gun grabber. So this whole thing about we're going to send the ricin letters and write letters to make it look like they're from the gun nuts, it was another hoax. She's a Hollywood anti-gunner. Liberal, guns are bad, guns are bad. It shows violence, so I'm going to put ricin in the letter and send it to the president here. By the way, apparently the way she was tracked down, just to give you an idea of how total the surveillance on our society is, apparently the post office now saves a digital image of every piece of mail received at a post office through every sorting center and out to the destination post office for delivery. So when you mail a card or a letter or a box from point A to point B, there is a digital computerized record of it every step along the way. Boy, oh boy, talk about paranoid here. The latest Gallup survey shows that 77% of Americans do not trust the television news. Imagine my shock. And that's a victory for those of us here in the independent media. And I know the corporate media is out there whining and crying and saying, oh, it's just, those gosh darn bloggers. We didn't do anything except tell the truth. The corporate media destroyed its own credibility by screaming about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, by screaming about human-caused global warming, screaming about all this other stuff, those gosh darn Arab Muslims. And so if the corporate media is losing their audience and their credibility, they have only themselves to blame for it. We're going to have a phone call here. Pat in the United Kingdom. Aloha. Pat, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Hello, Mike. Just thinking back to what you were saying just about 10 minutes ago. Quite interesting. You were talking about the way that if you have your home repossessed, you call it foreclosed, we call it repossessed, and the mortgage outstanding, the debt, is actually more than what the value of the home is. I don't know if you remember, but over here, that was a huge thing. Sort of around 20 years ago, we had the early 90s recessions. We had interest rates of about 15%, and you had a mortgage rate of about 18%. And that was a massive thing over here, repossessions everywhere. And what actually happened was that a lot of people, of course, lost their home, and there was a huge number of repossessions or foreclosures, is that these banks, these lenders, what they had been doing is that they had actually insured their loss, and you used not to be able to get a loan. You had to pay the insurance premium yourself for the lender to be actually covered. And so they were actually claiming off the insurance policies, and the insurance companies had something like 12 years to chase after the people, and people were really harassed, and chased and pursued, and I think they even had private detectives and things hunting people down to pursue them for the debt on a house that they had foreclosed on them, it could be up to 10 years ago. And I'm just wondering whether a lot of this credit default swap are in addition to loads of other bets that lots of other companies have taken out, a good proportion of these credit default swap derivatives things are based on the insurance element, that these lenders, they're totally covered. They get all the interest over 20 years and everything, and they even are insured if the lender defaults and he's foreclosed on. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, basically you're absolutely right. Both in the United States and in the European Union, the laws are set up to protect the banks and the bankers and to work against the people, because the attitude of the government is banks are holy and sacrosanct and must be protected at all costs. And the ordinary people, well, we've got plenty of those. We can use them up. And it really is. It's a complete reversal of the way the United States was set up 200-odd years ago, where banks were they were off to one side. They were not allowed complete control of the nation's economy under any circumstances. And there were laws that protected the people from criminal activity by the banks. And today it's completely different. We have Wall Street openly admitting that fraud is now part of their business. They rigged the LIBOR. They rigged the foreign exchange rates. They rigged all of this stuff out there, and yet the law protects them and not you. The foreclosure fraud should have been a major scandal. The Obama administration went out to all 50 states' attorneys general and arm-twisted them into going along with the foreclosure settlement, which was a wrist slap on all these companies that were engaged in robo-signing and document mills and outright frauds. In some cases, homes were taken that didn't even have a mortgage on them to begin with. And the homeowners who lost their homes to fraud got their portion of the foreclosure settlement, which came out to about $300 per person, and some of those checks bounced. And so that was basically the U.S. government's solution to the foreclosure fraud. Yes, the bank took your home and its equity, where you'd lived your entire life, and they were fraudulent about doing it, but here's $300 to help you with your next month's rent in that little hovel you're currently living in. And that was their idea of a solution, and I don't think the American people go along with that. All right, we're going to switch over to Chuck in Washington. Chuck, welcome back. I guess we had another messed up phone line. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to say hi there, Mike. We've been emailing for about 10 years, and I never called you and talked to you. And something happened today that made me want to call you. I saw an article on your site about somebody recommending you delete all your social networking stuff. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to do that. And I got rid of Twitter, Facebook, Google+. I kept my YouTube account, and there was a little trick there that it's easy enough if you look it up on the Internet using Google, ironically. But, yeah, it's easy enough to close down your accounts. And I'd recommend that, really. I think a mail list is far more effective because I know those people that give me something. When they actually give me their email address, that means something. They're not just clicking like or what have you.
Yes.
But that's about it. That's all I have to say, sir.
Well, the problem is that you can close down your Facebook account, okay, but it doesn't mean Facebook is deleting the data. In fact, we know for a fact they are not. Facebook for a long time has been known to make it impossible for you to actually erase your record inside their system. You can close your account and you can go away, but everything they've collected on you up to this point is still being saved by Facebook and presumably by the NSA. Same thing with Twitter. You can shut down your social media accounts, and at this point I think you ought to. Go back to talking to your friends and neighbors face to face. Go back to HumanNet. Go back to the HumanNet. But
the 3D meet space, yes. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the reality is that whatever you've already put in to Facebook and MySpace and Twitter, it's there, and there's no way to shut it off under the current laws.
I understand, Mike, but what we can do is we can immediately take a stand at this point, that minute, that second. I said, no more. This is a protest against the NSA and their little spying stuff. We know they've been doing it for years, ever since the Echelon conversations we had way back, and using Linux instead of Windows. That we've been talking about this for 10 years.
You're right about that, and I would encourage everybody, if you don't really need Facebook for business purposes or something, shut it down. Those aren't your real friends out there. You've never actually met most of those people. You wouldn't recognize them if you passed them in the street. It's an illusion of a community. So you need to shut that off and go back out into your real community. The people who live around you, the people who go to the same stores that you do, go back to the human net, because that's the one net NSA can't tap and spy on.
Well, we agree on that one.
Okay?
That's all I got to say, Mike. You want to move on?
Yeah, time to move on here. We got a lot of stuff that we...
please do.
All right, we got to take care of some stuff here. Let's see. CNN poll, majority don't trust Obama. Approval rating suffers major drop. And apparently a new CNN poll said his numbers have gone down. Apparently they're saying his approval rating is 45%. I don't even think it's that high. I think the corporate media is still trying to cover for him. We just started our own poll on whatreallyhappened.com. Do you approve of President Obama? 97% no. 3% yes, and I presume that's some of the NSA bozos keeping an eye on us. Second poll, do you trust the U.S. government? 99% no. We'll be right back.
New York City.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Well, I totally disagree with backing off from the social networks. They win. If that intimidation tactic of theirs wins, if millions of people are paying attention out on the web, looking at things, listening to things, twittering it out, I just started tweaking, because we need more people putting more things out. Millions and millions of eyes and ears watching them, that's what can help stop them. If we let them cow us into...
No, we're not talking about cowing. We're not talking about cowing, because we're not talking about stop using text or stop using email. We're encouraging people to start going out and talking to each other in public. But if we pull out of these giant commercial operations that are fronting for the NSA and they collapse out of business, it's going to send a message to the rest of the Internet service providers, hey, you'd better respect that Fourth Amendment or we're going to start pulling out of you as well. At this point, I think it's pretty obvious that Facebook's stock is being propped up by the government because it's become such a focus point for NSA spying. And as I said earlier in the show, data mining social media and thinking you're getting accurate information is a complete nonsensical idea. But I'm not telling people to stop emailing to each other. I'm not telling people to stop writing their own blogs. What I'm saying is these commercial operations that were sold to us as the go-to place for social interaction, obviously we've got a reason to pull away from them and let them collapse to show it's a bad business model when you sell yourself out to the NSA.
How do things go viral if we don't have Facebook and Twitter? How do emails end up going viral? It's much slower.
It doesn't matter if it's slow or not. If it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if it's slow or not. You go back to the early history of the Internet. Right after the Internet broke free from the government and stopped being the ARPANET and began the Internet, all you had was email, FTP, and Usenet. And stories still went viral around the globe. All this other web browsing and the rest of it came along, and and it was all homogenized, and it was all everybody communicating with everybody. And this attempt to promote Facebook or MySpace or Twitter as the one go-to place was intentionally set up so that there would be these single points for surveillance, single point for control. We know that Facebook will delete accounts that have stuff the government doesn't want in there. We know that YouTube will play games with videos where they'll say, oh, this video is now private, and the owner of the video did not actually make it so. And that's the problem. When you allow yourself to get lured to a single point of control and surveillance, the advantage goes to the government. So we need to go back to a centerless, leaderless form of communication. Everybody passing messages along through email, through local chat boards, and it'll still go viral because it did back in the days of dial-up bulletin boards, long before the big corporate Facebook and Google and the rest of it came along. Stories went viral. When I started with all this stuff back with Vincent Foster, was back when Usenet was still the primary means of getting information out there. And I got it out there, which is, of course, why they wrecked my career in Hollywood. And so this is our opportunity to express our displeasure against those corporations that sold our privacy out to the government, to say, I don't want to be part of your operation anymore. I'm not part of your audience base. I'm not part of your marketing research that you make money off of. I am disconnecting from it. And I'm going to spend more time talking with my friends and neighbors face-to-face about what's going on. I'm going to spend more time using emails and other forms of communication that don't go through a central switcher. Remember how the samizdat brought down the Soviet Union. That was just a network of fax machines. And they didn't let themselves get suckered into using a central gathering place in the virtual world where everything could be watched and monitored and, if necessary, censored. And we need to go back to that model. We need to go back to the samizdat model.
I say use it all.
Well,
Twitter,
obviously,
use Facebook, use YouTube, use
obviously, we disagree on this one. Okay? We know that these main gathering places were set up to make it easier for the NSA to spy on us. We know that they were set up so that everybody was coming to this one little place where they could be watched and, if necessary, controlled and censored. And we need to abandon that model. It works for the government and less for the people. You need to start keeping email lists of people who listen to what you're saying and get it out there. And more important, you need to put down that keyboard and go out into your local community and talk to your friends and neighbors. How do you feel about all these endless wars? How do you feel about the spy scandal? And just start going back to the human net, because the NSA can't spy on the human net. They can't censor the human net. They can't control the human net. All of these big MySpace, Facebook, Twitter were set up to corral you into one place where you could be watched and monitored and, if necessary, interfered with. And if we start dropping Facebook and MySpace and the rest of it, they're going to collapse financially, and that will send a message to everybody else who's still out there. You do not betray your users' privacy to the government without paying a price for it. That's a message we need to send. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And by the way, if you want to go on using your Facebook or MySpace or Twitter, that's just fine. Just understand the NSA is watching everything that you do. So what you ought to do is just make a point in every one of your tweets and posts and all the rest of it. Include a terror word like Allah or anthrax or any one of that huge list of words that trips off the computers to pay attention to what you're doing there. And that'll jam up the system. Sooner or later, they're going to realize the raw feedstock into this online surveillance system is junk to begin with. You can't get accurate intelligence about the American people through social media because everybody exaggerates. It's almost a cliche that your Facebook picture is actually from 5, 6, 7 years ago. Exactly, especially people looking to make a romantic connection through social media. They're always exaggerating. How big they are, how strong they are, how sexy they are, how much money they make. It's not a reliable source of intelligence, and there are no computer algorithms that are going to derive meaningful, accurate information out of everybody's bragging, which is what it comes down to. Now, Michael Bloomberg, not happy with controlling the size of your soft drinks, not happy with controlling people smoking out in open parks, not happy with encouraging everybody to ride bicycles, which all sound good, but it's really personal decisions he's talking about. His new one is that he's going to try and get a law mandating everybody in New York to have a separate garbage bin for food garbage only. So never mind separating out the paper and the plastics and the metal. Now he wants everybody to separate out the food garbage for a gigantic composting operation. Now, when people live on farms, they do this automatically. It's just part of what you do to support your garden. But having all these little separate bins for New Yorkers living in high-rises, they're going to have a hard time with that. And I don't think they can make it work anyway because of the short lifespan of this material for composting to begin with. I remember living here in Hawaii where they went green and liberal, and you've got to have separate bins for glossy paper and a separate bin for the non-glossy paper, and bottles and cans and regular trash. And then one day I saw them picking up the trash, and they were dumping all those bins into the same trash truck because the actual business to take all this stuff and recycle it had collapsed. But the law was still there, and everybody had to follow it. Just nonsense stuff here. Very alarming Supreme Court decision came down in the case of Genovevo Salinas, where the United States Supreme Court 5-4 ruled that silence by a suspect before being informed of their Miranda rights can be construed as proof of guilt by prosecutors. In other words, you're not... Remember the good old days when anything that was said or not said before you were Mirandized was inadmissible. And now they've completely reversed it. If you stay quiet because you already know your Miranda rights before they officially give you the Miranda rights, that is now, according to the United States Supreme Court, can be used as proof of guilt. Did he say anything at all? No, he didn't say anything at all. That's it, he's guilty. Take him out and hang him. Twice. Amazing stuff. Libya's top general has quit after the protests in Libya have turned violent. Looks like those Libyan people just really aren't happy with their brand new U.S. puppet regime and their brand new private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest. I think those Libyan people miss that gold dinar and their state bank that made life so good for them. They seem to be really upset. You're not hearing a lot about the Libyan protests in the media because it does represent another abject fail for America's foreign policy. At least it's stated foreign policy. We're bringing the benefits of Western life to the Libyans. They don't want Gaddafi. They don't want the gold dinar. They don't want a state central bank. And here we've brought all these new things. And obviously they do not like that at all. Meanwhile, Iceland has shocked the European Union by putting a halt to their application for membership in the EU. I guess they're looking over at that European Central Bank and realizing it's kind of a lot like the banks that got Iceland into trouble to begin with. And so they're putting a brake on that. And the European Union is saying, how dare you not want to be part of us? How dare you don't want to be part of the European Central Banking family of happy depositors and debtors? Going to take a phone call here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing great.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, I got to say, Mike, even in our camp and all that stuff, I think they got this whole financial system wrong, and they're making the bankers look out bigger than what they really are. And seeing how Russia had her trying to deter war, I think, like I say, Putin playing chess, if they could deter war long enough, these European banks will collapse because they got this thing called the derivatives debt. They think, oh, they're going to use these derivatives against us to implode the economy. Well, excuse me, these derivatives are the Achilles heel for them, too.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I'm sure that Vladimir Putin understands, as do we, that we are in a race between the collapse of Western banking and their attempt to obfuscate that with a new global war. And the longer we can delay the start of that global war, the more likely it is we're going to see this Western banking system implode, and we will be at a unique point in history where all these private central banks come crashing down at the same time, and the world can stand up and kick them all out and say, state-controlled banks, public currency as a public utility from here on out. And it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get rid of all these private banks at the same time, because up until now, anytime a nation collapsed or their people rebelled and threw out the private central bank, all the other nations with a private central bank would immediately pile on and say, oh, no, you have to go back into the slavery of a private central bank. But because of globalism, they could all come down together at the same time. And if they do, we, the people of planet Earth, need to be ready to give them the permanent heave-ho. We need to take all these private central bank money junkies and we need to tar and feather them, hang, draw, quarter, burn, and have the ashes peed on by a rabid dog.
Mike, you know, the thing is like with Russia, it's a part of the thing of dealing with the influence of private central bank is requiring NGOs funded by these banks to register as a foreign agent because they were causing problems.
Well, yeah, I mean, Russia's trying to get rid of them. They caught USAID was out there, supposed to be this benevolent, charitable, non-governmental organization, and they were caught funneling money into these groups which are now trying to gin up riots and protests against the Russian government. It's a repeating pattern. We've seen it time and time again. Back in 2009, we saw it in Iran when they tried to create the illusion of a coup d'etat and a revolution, and all those people screaming against Ahmadinejad, they were all being funded through these NGOs. And so countries who do not wish to be overthrown from without, need to keep an eye on those NGOs.
And saying this, like I say, Russia is the biggest deterrent to war. They're very well equipped. They got shiny new equipment. They're well maintained. As for us, our military is suffering through attrition. Our soldiers are worn out.
Yeah, we don't have the men, we don't have the money, we don't have the manufacturing. Putin is the only world leader who's acting like an adult right now, and he's trying to keep this thing from going any further than it already has. And you have Israelis' leadership throwing a tantrum, we want our war now! And you have the United States going like the indulgent parent, all right, we'll give you your war now. We have the money junkies saying, we need a new global war to save us from our self-created Ponzi collapse. And Putin's the only one who's standing up there and saying, all right, everybody calm down. We don't want to let this go any further because we're risking really global nuclear war. And the bankers are saying, we don't care. Blow half the world up. We'll loan you the money to build it back up again.
Another thing, too, about Russia banning adoption of Russian children to America. One of the biggest reasons is not because of abusive parents, that was just a cover story, but the real reason was they were being used for child trafficking, for pedophilia in the United States.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised about that. I wouldn't be surprised about that. I mean, I don't know what it is about the upper reaches of power. Maybe it's in order to be allowed to graduate to that upper political elite, you have to do something that's so disgusting that you can be blackmailed for it, like child molestation. Because once you're blackmailable, you're reliable, and the power structure can trust you. But if you're a decent, honest, moral human being, like Ron Paul, you can't be relied on to do what you're told. You might actually make a decision based on the law or morality or ethics, and that would be the loose cannon on the decks of the ship of the banker's state.
Well, the only concern I have about banning the adoption to Americans is that you'll have third parties in Europe that will readopt them to America, and it'll create a black market. That's the only thing I'm concerned about.
Well, it is a mess, and I don't understand all this child trafficking. I don't understand what's been going on in the Catholic Church. I don't understand the Franklin scandal and what's going on. Maybe it's part of being a sociopathic personality that you find children stimulating. As far as adults are concerned, I'm a very easygoing guy. Whatever 2 or 3 or 5 consenting adults want to do with or without household appliances and farm animals, fine, let them have fun. But when it comes to children, I have some very old primal instincts that kick in, and I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. You do not abuse kids like this. You don't.
Well,
Period.
I'd say one thing.
Yeah.
Those child molesters in government, we should just release them into the general population in the prison system.
Yeah. In the prison, child molesters, there's actually a social hierarchy in prison among the prisoners. And the child molesters are at the very, very bottom rung. And they get to experience firsthand what it feels like, what those little kids felt like when they're having these things done to them. And I think it's perfectly appropriate, and I don't have a problem with that at all, one bit. Okay?
Stands as a deterrent and stands strong because if they can keep these wars from starting, like I say, this derivative debt is the Achilles heel. So, Max Kaiser and all these people, they got it wrong because they've been part of the system for a while, and they got a blind spot. That's the problem when we look at things too deep in their system. We get a blind spot, and that's where I think they're wrong.
Well, part of it is that because of our sort of reductionist philosophy in education, where everybody is burrowing down deeper and deeper to look at fine details, it becomes easy to miss that holistic overview. And I think a lot of our fellow commentators out here in the independent media are sometimes blinded by their focus on a particular aspect of what's going on, where they can't take that step back and say, all right, how does this all fit together into a whole that makes sense, the overview, the universal field theory, if you want to call it. And so as a result, they're not seeing how what they're looking at interacts with the rest of it into that larger pattern that would lead you back to this all wars are bankers' wars. And you're absolutely right. The derivatives are the Achilles heel of the Western banking system. That's why they're doing everything they can to prop up Europe. The first European country that defaults or leaves the EU, there's going to be a firestorm of credit default swaps. Wall Street's going to turn around to the U.S. government and say, you got to make the American people pay for it. The U.S. government's going to say to the American people, you got to pay for this. The American people are going to say, we don't have it. You've already got all of our money. And that's when the whole thing's going to come crashing down. They may just crank up the printing presses. We'll be into Zimbabwe territory with $100 trillion paper notes in our pockets before they admit this system has failed. Because these are... Yeah, these are...
Well, toilet paper be worth a lot more.
That's, life is cheap, but toilet paper is expensive kind of mentality here. The fact is, these are not people who are ever able or willing to take responsibility for their failings. It's always going to be somebody else's fault. That's the way politics operates, and they'll blame China, or they'll blame Iran, or they'll blame anybody, but they won't look at a mirror. And that, of course, is a big reason why in the blueprint for the new America, anybody running or applying for a government office has to go through a psychological test to make sure they're not a sociopath. We cannot allow these people into positions of power and control in our society any longer. It has always, always led to disaster. We don't allow psychotics into government office or corporate leadership. We don't allow kleptomaniacs into these positions. We say, oh, this person's got a mental illness, let's keep him out. Well, sociopathy is a mental illness, and it's just as dangerous, and we need to basically keep these people out of positions of power. All right, George, got to let you go. Got one more phone call to get here. Steve in Manhattan. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, yes, that's certain topics I have. Actually, there's an interesting video on YouTube. You can just type Rockefeller roast, and Jay Rockefeller's attending a roast with of Pat Buchanan in 1991, and he jokes about the Trial Commission and Bilderberg Group, and Newt Gingrich's in the audience, and he says that we own the politicians, blah blah, and you should sell out to the New World Order type thing, and this is 1991, and hardly anybody in 1991 knew about the Bilderberg Group, and he was talking about it openly in this roast of Pat Buchanan. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking at it here right now, and as soon as the show is over in about 10 minutes, I'll play it and look at it, and if I like it, I'll put it up.
All right, thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Okay. Oh, my goodness, Monday, and I'm already exhausted here. Let's see. Arctic ice extent, highest in a decade. The world is cooling. It is noticeably cooler this summer in Hawaii than it has been in years past, and still they're out there. Global warming, carbon dioxide. They're shifting gears, though, because this whole carbon credit scam is collapsing. Al Gore had to shut down his carbon trade. It wasn't working. Now they've come up with a new idea, climate change insurance. You will have to buy insurance to protect yourself from the costly effects of human-caused climate change, from extreme weather events. Now, in the good old days, your regular household insurance pretty much covered from that. There was an exception called acts of God, meaning a really big quake or a really superstorm or something. They say, oh, you're on your own. But you can buy insurance to cover that already. But now they're talking about a climate change insurance policy, and you just know they're going to make it mandatory, like they did with Obamacare, because it makes more money for the insurance companies, and that's what makes the fascist states of America truly, truly great. Now, I wrote an article over the weekend called The New Nihilism, and I posted it to whatreallyhappened.com, and I got a lot of emails about it. And it talks about the social malaise that afflicts society after truly epical events of death and destruction. And I start as my foundation, World War I and the Spanish flu, which shattered people's ability to believe there was going to be a better world tomorrow. And it led to the bohemian lifestyle and that whole live for right now, drink, smoke, do drugs attitude. And we saw it again after World War II with the beatnik generation. Vietnam led to the hippies. And when we come back from these commercials, I'm going to explain why this may be a problem for the next coming war. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about nihilism, which is the absence of belief in anything, including society itself. Now, atheism is the absence of belief in the imaginary playmate in the sky. Nihilism is more all-encompassing. It is simply the absence of faith or belief, period. And it was triggered by World War I and the Spanish flu, which I don't know why they named it the Spanish flu, because it came out of the United States of America, from a military base, I might add. But it led to what Gertrude Stein called the lost generation, people who just lived for the day, lived for the moment, artists, the bohemian lifestyle, just doing as little as it took to get along until death finally claimed them. And then, of course, after World War II, we saw the beatnik generation, the same process all over again. Vietnam, to a lesser extent, led to the hippies. Live for the moment, enjoy life, and basically, because nobody believed there was a better world coming after they'd seen all these horrors firsthand. And they came to understand why work and sacrifice for a future that could be wiped from the face of the earth at the whim of whichever world leader is the least mentally stable. Why worry about health? Why exercise? You could be dead tomorrow. Why struggle to be a productive worker for the money junkies? Why not enjoy life? Why not smoke? Why not drink? Why not do drugs? Why not have sex with everybody? Why worry about future consequences of your actions today when the future is demonstrably under the control of people who could blow that future up on an alarmingly regular basis? Now, we're already seeing this nihilism surface in our society, and it proceeds from multiple sources. First of all, from all these ongoing wars, inevitably leading to a new war. We went along with the war in Iraq because we were told it was going to make our lives better, and it didn't. Then we went along with the war in Afghanistan. We were told that would make our lives better. We went along with the war in Libya. We were told that would make our lives better. Every time we go along for another war, what do we get for it? Another war for our children to die in. The economy is a factor in the new nihilism. All these stock market frauds, the foreclosure fraud, people have seen the work of a lifetime stripped away from them for the money junkies. Seeing all these college kids who went to school and got into debt to student loans with the promise of high-paying jobs that simply do not exist. What kind of a message are we sending to young people about their futures when they see graduates with advanced degrees working at fast food places? Can we blame them for an attitude of, why should I bother getting an education? It's not going to help me out. Corporate media has destroyed its own credibility over the last years with overt government and corporate propaganda like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. But we're seeing this new nihilism surface in our society, and the problem is it's surfacing before the war is over. And that means that's another reason why the U.S. is going to lose this war. You don't have people willing to sacrifice for war if they don't believe and trust that war will lead to a better world. And nobody does. It just leads to more war. That's it for our show. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well. Keep yourself fully informed. Stay skeptical. Make good choices. Back here tomorrow. Aloha, America.